Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really unpacking something fundamental, this often complex and, yeah, sometimes baffling process of making your life.
Right.
We've got the source material you shared that dives deep into, choices, values, and how we navigate all that external stuff trying to shape us.
It's a really fascinating exploration looking at how everything from, say, outside expectations and economic reality to just plain old luck
Yeah.
and the values we absorbed growing up, how all that feeds into the paths we take.
Okay.
Our mission in this deep dive, I guess, is to cut through some of that complexity and see how we can find our own genuine definition of fulfillment and success amidst it all.
All right, let's jump in then. The sources start right at the foundation, presenting values and identity as like two sides of the same coin.
That's the core idea, yeah.
Hmm.
The argument is pretty straightforward. Our values are the compass for our choices, and then, well, those choices are what ultimately define who we become. On the surface, the phrase life is what you make it sounds simple enough, but the actual making, that's where things get incredibly nuanced and, like you said, sometimes baffling.
And that complexity seems to come from the outside world blurring the picture, right? All those external pressures you mentioned.
Absolutely. Expectations, economic realities, social pressures, and yes, even just dumb luck, they all play a role in shaping the landscape we navigate.
Mm-hmm.
But the source material holds firm that despite all that, the act of creating your life is ultimately within your power. It frames it as both, well, a profound burden and an incredible opportunity.
So what are some of the key foundational values this material highlights? Trust seems to be a big one.
Trust is presented as just fundamental. It allows us to approach the world with a kind of cheerful stance. It starts, ideally, in a loving family environment and then extends outward into a caring community.
Mm-hmm.
The source shares a personal reflection on this, noting that this feeling of safety and trust wasn't really dependent on money or material advantages.
Oh, that's interesting. So it wasn't about having like a big house or living in a fancy neighborhood.
Not at all. The feeling of safety came from the love in the house, from neighbors actually talking to each other and, looking out for one another.
Right.
The acts of kindness that fostered that trust, that belief in the basic goodness of people, were simple, human things. Hugs, sharing ice cream, help with homework, things you can't really measure in dollars.
Yeah.
It does acknowledge, though, that for people who didn't grow up with that kind of serene, supportive environment, well, developing that initial trust can be a significantly greater challenge.
And how does that connect to tolerance? That's another value mentioned.
Well, if trust helps us feel comfortable engaging with the world, tolerance is what helps us navigate the inevitable differences we encounter. Potential conflicts.
Differences in race, religion, orientation, politics, all that stuff,
Exactly. All the things that can feel challenging sometimes.
which can definitely make life feel harder.
They can, yeah. But the source pivots on this a bit. It argues that these very differences provide diversity, the spice of life, as they say, and that embracing this diversity actually enriches our own world.
What's the flip side then, if you aren't tolerant?
The picture painted is quite vivid. Intolerance, prejudice, bias, these things don't just harm others, they shrink and impoverish your own world. The source describes it as making your life resemble a small, snooty, and deathly dull country club.
Oof. That image definitely sticks. There's a powerful anecdote in the material about this, isn't there? Involving a bumper sticker.
Yes, exactly. The author's mother had this bumper sticker, "Nice people come in all colors." Then one day someone vandalized it, crossing out everything but white.
Wow. That's just awful. But I imagine it made a point pretty starkly.
It was a revelation, apparently.
Mhm.
The author had thought racism was, a distant problem, something you saw in the news from places like Selma. But this petty act right there in Omaha, it brought it home.
So you can never take tolerance for granted. You have to actively cultivate it.
Precisely. And the anecdote also highlighted a kind of hidden bias, the easy assumption that prejudice is other people's failing, maybe those you deem benighted Southerners, rather than recognizing it can be present anywhere, even in your own community.
Hmm. The mother also seems to have strongly emphasized religious tolerance as well.
Very much so. She viewed different religions not as, like, competing claims to truth, but as varied human efforts to connect with the divine, all worthy of respect.
Interesting approach.
Yeah, instead of seeing them as sources of division, she saw them as potential allies in a shared quest for meaning. She even got nicknamed Dalai Mama for always fostering this perspective. It sounds like a truly open-hearted way to see things.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to look at it. So, moving from these foundational values, the source spends some time on education and work ethic.
Right. A deep, fervent belief in education was another core family value. But the
Yeah.
material makes a critical distinction here.
Is this about job training versus a broader education? Is that the idea?
Precisely. Job training is characterized as narrow, goal-oriented, like getting an MBA specifically to go into investment banking, for example. It's practical, obviously necessary for many paths, but it's presented as just one piece of the puzzle.
And the broader education, what's valued there?
That's more about diving into things like philosophy, sciences, literature. The core isn't just acquiring knowledge, but the joy of discovery, the delight in learning itself. The source uses the Italian word dilettare, to take delight. Highlighting that passion for exploration is central.
This seems connected to the idea of options, doesn't it? Having choices.
It absolutely is.
Mhm.
The source directly links privilege to having the widest possible array of options available to you. Conversely, a lack of options may be due to corrupt governments, lack of education, difficult circumstances, is called a cruel deprivation. As frustrating, really, as hunger or thirst.
Because it restricts your ability to choose your own path.
Exactly. And then, beyond education, developing a personal work ethic is presented as crucial for self-respect. But here again, it's not just about, working hard.
What's the nuance with the work ethic they discuss?
It's not simply willingness to work long hours or make sacrifices. It's about finding fulfillment in the substance of the work itself.
Okay.
It's the exercise of curiosity, the challenge of testing analyses, the adventure of discovering value in what you actually do.
So the work itself is the reward, and money is kind of secondary.
Money is seen as a positive outcome,
Mhm.
maybe confirmation your approach is sound, but not the driving force. The source suggests that working only for money makes your efforts, well, stunted, joyless, incomplete. Sounds like a recipe for burnout, honestly.
Okay, so we've got this foundation of values, education, work ethic. But then there's this element of privilege that complicates things. The source uses a really striking phrase for it, the two-edged sword.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, yes, privilege can undeniably open up a world of opportunities, provide advantages. But the other edge of that sword brings pressures, external pressures, like parental expectations, social trends, economic shifts, and internal self-imposed pressures that can actually limit those very possibilities.
And inherited wealth is specifically brought up here, often seen as the ultimate privilege, right?
It is. But the source quotes Warren Buffett referring to a silver spoon as potentially a silver dagger in the back.
Yeah.
The idea being that it can sap ambition and rob a young person of the great adventure of finding his or her own way.
That's a fascinating perspective, and Buffett's own approach with his children seems to embody this.
It does seem to. He's famously quoted as giving them enough to do anything, but not enough to do nothing.
Right.
The goal was explicitly not to remove all challenges, but to ensure they had the drive and the opportunity to earn their own satisfaction, make their own mark, rather than just, living off trust funds.
The material also makes the point that even in affluent families, well-meaning parents might not fully grasp the difficulties their kids face.
That's a crucial insight. While money handles basic necessities, it doesn't magically eliminate problems or make emotional pain any less real. The source points to clinical studies indicating higher rates of psychological distress, depression, even suicide risk among affluent adolescents compared to national averages. These are serious issues that financial security just doesn't solve.
So just writing a check for an expensive school isn't enough, not even close.
Far from it. Paying tuition is one thing. Taking an active, engaged interest in what your child is learning, asking questions, offering help, that's quite another. Kids can apparently sense if that expensive education is truly a gift given with care, or if it's kind of a way for parents to delegate their own nurturing responsibilities.
Buying their way out, almost.
Essentially, yeah. Buying their way out of their share of expanding curiosity.
And making things too easy can actually hinder a child's development.
The source argues it can profoundly subvert their chances for building durable self-esteem. They're deprived of the hard knocks that build character, the experience of overcoming challenges and earning confidence through their own efforts.
The material also touches on a concept like grace made manifest, almost using a religious framing for secular advantages. It's interesting.
It is an interesting connection. It suggests that secular advantages, like having loving parents or economic security, are a form of grace, an unearned gift you didn't choose or work for.
Okay.
The idea, drawing loosely on Calvinist thought apparently, is that this gift gains meaning not in its possession, but in what you do with it. how you return it to the world.
It's about using those advantages as opportunities, not treating them as entitlements or free passes.
Exactly. The source observes that some privileged individuals can project an air of entitlement, but often this might be a mask for a lack of genuine self-respect, which can only be earned through one's own achievements. They may have been inadvertently denied that challenging but ultimately, redemptive journey of self-discovery through struggle.
Like the examples given of Ken Griffey Jr. or Kate Hudson, they had a head start.
Yeah, their parents' fame offered advantages, sure, in getting exposure, but ultimately their legitimacy and success in their fields, baseball and acting, came down to their own performance, their own talent, their determination.
Right.
The author reflects on his own experience getting into Stanford with a privileged assist, feeling it undermined his sense of confidence and earned legitimacy in his own mind.
So privilege definitely adds layers of complication. And speaking of complication, let's shift to the role of time, wishes, and mistakes. The source suggests privilege has a complex relationship with time as well.
It does. On the one hand, privilege should theoretically grant the luxury of time, financial security, family support, and education fostering patience. These things should reduce the immediate pressure to jump onto the fastest track just to make money.
But in reality, it doesn't always feel that way, does it?
No. The source points out that in our fast-paced world, the fear of falling behind pushes people to hurry. Introspection, taking time to think and reflect, can feel like a luxury you just can't afford. Yet the argument is you absolutely need that time to slow down and figure things out.
There's a personal story in there about using an inheritance specifically to buy time.
It's a great illustration. The author inherited a sum of money and consciously chose to use it to buy time to dedicate himself to music, something he was finally ready to commit to seriously.
Okay.
He doesn't regret not holding onto the stock, which would have been worth vastly more later, because that inheritance arrived at precisely the moment he needed that space, that time, to learn his craft and make the music truly his own.
So time is presented as being even more valuable than money.
Infinitely more so, in the source's view. Wasted time is irreplaceable. Money, while important, is generally a renewable resource. The paradox is that people often live as if their dreams can wait, but a paycheck can't, even when, that's not strictly true.
Which forces a pretty fundamental choice for many people.
It often boils down to whether you prioritize acquiring money, quickly taking the high-paying job immediately, or whether you prioritize having the time to explore options for work you genuinely want, even if it means living more modestly for a while.
This brings us to the idea of vocation, which the source defines quite broadly.
Right. Vocation isn't just about finding paid work you're passionate about. It's defined as the tug we feel toward the life that is right for us, the life that is truly our own. That sense of bliss or rightness might be centered around work, but the source clarifies it doesn't have to be confined to that. It can be found in any aspect of a chosen path.
And finding that niche, that right path, seems to involve marrying a general inkling with your specific abilities and temperament.
Yes, because the source argues that true uniqueness lies not in a single talent, but in the particular combination of your traits. And finding that combination, well, takes time, involves self-doubt, requires experimentation.
Like the author's music journey.
Exactly. His journey with music involved using a simple tool like a tape recorder to objectively analyze his work, which helped him quiet the internal insecurity that came from comparing himself to others.
There's also an interesting observation about how the mind works in this process, lagging behind the heart.
Yes, the idea that the mind often works indirectly and lags behind the heart. The heart seems to know things first, and only later does the mind catch up, providing the words, the logic, the explanations to understand what the heart already felt. Kind of intuitive.
Moving into the actual experience of working, the source mentions the concept of friction, making sparks fly. What's that about?
Well, when you're working for pay, you're inherently involved in relationships with bosses, colleagues, clients. Navigating these interactions creates a kind of friction, but it's often this very friction that can make professional life dynamic and where, as the source says, sparks fly.
Okay, so we're on this path, hopefully finding our niche, dealing with friction, and we're definitely going to make mistakes along the way.
Inevitably. The source is very clear. Mistakes are a natural part of life. They happen, and the good news is they are usually fixable. they're rarely permanent, catastrophic disasters.
So the fear of making mistakes is actually the bigger problem.
Absolutely. The fear of mistakes is far more limiting than the mistakes themselves. It keeps you stuck on the safest, most conventional paths, preventing you from taking the necessary chances to discover what you're truly capable of or what truly resonates with you.
And playing it safe doesn't even guarantee no mistakes.
Exactly. And paradoxically, even playing it safe doesn't prevent you from making mistakes anyway.
There's a specific anecdote about a mistake that wasn't actually what it seemed initially, involving a job loss.
Yes, the story about the author's brother who lost his job during an economic downturn. At first, he saw being fired as the mistake. But with time and reflection, he realized the firing was just the trigger or the occasion to see the real mistake, which was taking that job in the first place because it felt safe and allowed him to avoid the anxiety of exploring other, potentially more fulfilling options.
Ah, so tough times can actually force necessary reevaluations that lead to better paths down the road.
Precisely. They can compel you to analyze your initial choices and maybe course correct towards a life that's more genuinely aligned with your interests and temperament. The brother in the story eventually went to law school, became a patent attorney, synthesized his interests in a much more fulfilling way.
The author also shares his own classic big house blunder. Sounds relatable.
The story is very relatable, yes. Buying a large, expensive house that created significant financial strain and anxiety. It became, in his words, a symbol of misplaced ambition.
And this is likened to the myth of King Midas. That connection is interesting.
It is a seemingly desirable gain, the big house turning into a terrible burden. This kind of painful irony, like Midas's touch turning everything to gold, often arises from internal confusion between what we think will bring happiness and what is truly important for our well-being.
Because we tend to confuse what we really want with what we think we want, often influenced by social signals, promotions, etc.
That's a key takeaway. Society constantly sends us signals about what we should want: raises, promotions, public recognition. This social pressure makes it incredibly difficult to discern our true desires and make decisions based on what will genuinely make us happy, not just what looks good on paper or to others.
And the material also delves into the flip side of wishes, what happens when they aren't granted. It starts with a warning about wishing itself.
It does. It starts by cautioning against the dangers of wishing itself, especially when it substitutes for preparation. Hoping for something isn't the same as getting ready for it.
Right.
The author's wish to write for movies came true years later, but he lacked the specific craft needed at the time. Ability versus preparedness. A wish coming true should be seen as a starting point, really, not an end point.
Okay, so wishing has pitfalls. But a thwarted wish, how can that be a blessing? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, life has this surprising symmetry sometimes. Just as a granted wish can sometimes become a burden or a curse, like Midas or the editor who gets the top job but is miserable, a thwarted wish can actually be a hidden blessing.
How so?
Because being denied that specific narrow thing you thought you desperately wanted forces you to look deeper. It compels you to question what you really want, not just what you thought you wanted based on external factors, maybe.
Okay.
When that pinpoint goal vanishes, you're forced to rub your eyes, so to speak, and look at the wider universe of possibilities you might have ignored.
The story of the young woman who wanted the corporate law internship is a perfect illustration of this, isn't it?
It really is. She came from a family of lawyers, was set for a top law school, had her sights set on corporate law, specifically that internship. When she was denied due to economic conditions, it felt like a small death, the death of a long-held plan.
But that disappointment led her down a different path she might never have considered otherwise.
Exactly. She took a much more modest internship at an environmental nonprofit, initially with a chip on her shoulder, as the source puts it. But working outdoors, getting her hands dirty, proved incredibly liberating. It forced her to reevaluate everything, opening her mind to environmental law, or maybe even natural science.
So the denial of her specific wish allowed her to completely change course and find a life that felt more genuinely her own.
That's the power of a thwarted wish, according to the source. If she'd gotten that corporate internship, she likely would have just stayed on that predetermined path. The no forced her to look up and see a much wider world of options she had previously overlooked.
And this ties directly into how we define success, which our society seems pretty obsessed with, often in narrow ways.
Absolutely. Society tends to define success by external markers, money, status, awards, titles. The source points out that basing your sense of self-worth and confidence on these things is inherently risky.
Why risky?
Because the outside world is fickle, uncontrollable. If your confidence depends on the next promotion or award, What happens when those things don't come, or worse, are taken away? You're left vulnerable.
So a purely money-based definition of success is just too unstable.
That's the argument. Prudence suggests steering away from defining your worth based on what the market or society is willing to pay or award you at any given moment. Instead, the source points towards a more robust, personal definition rooted in internal markers.
Things like earning self-respect, finding fulfillment, achieving peace of mind.
Precisely. Internal success is something you earn within yourself through your choices and commitments. It cannot be tarnished or taken away by the unpredictable outside world. It's yours.
Social fashion dictates what looks like success at different times, doesn't it? Like the yuppie example.
Yeah, think about the yuppie culture of the 80s the source mentions. Telling someone you were a writer might elicit the blunt question, successful, meaning making money. Aiming for these socially prescribed versions of success is easy in a way, because it requires no originality or deep soul-searching. You're just following the crowd.
But adopting a personal version of success requires courage then.
Significant courage. It means fighting against that cultural tide, that flow. The source emphasizes the absolute necessity of breaking through all the noise to arrive at a clear understanding of your own definition of success. No one else can measure it or judge it for you.
That makes sense.
The success you define for yourself is the true treasure, something that cannot be taken or devalued by external forces.
Shifting gears slightly, the source also talks quite a bit about the importance of giving back.
It seems to stem from the belief that despite all our differences in circumstances, people are fundamentally more alike than different. We share common hopes, fears, needs, the universal search for meaning. That commonality is why great stories and art resonate across cultures.
And giving back isn't just about, say, writing a check, though that's good too.
Well, while charitable donations are positive, the source argues that the most genuine and fulfilling forms of giving back are those integral to who you are, springing organically from your values and your skills. This personal giving back creates what the source calls an enrichment loop.
And an enrichment loop, how does that work?
You give, you contribute something meaningful, and you receive something valuable back from the world. Maybe connection, perspective, satisfaction. And in doing so, you discover you have even more to give. It feeds itself.
The author's involvement in the Spirit Dance show seems to be an example of this personal giving back using his specific skills.
It is. He saw it as an opportunity to contribute by applying his craft of matching music to story. But the project also required him to think deeply about storytelling itself, which led him to read Joseph Campbell and his concept of the hero's journey.
The hero's journey.
Yeah, viewing it not just as an external adventure, but an inward quest for self-knowledge that allows you to reconnect with the world and potentially guide others. The show itself was ultimately about reconnection.
It sounds like giving back also requires real effort and stepping outside your comfort zone sometimes.
Definitely. The author acknowledges his own complex feelings about inheriting wealth, feeling it was unearned and potentially crippling. Overcoming this meant accepting that some advantages come from luck and consciously integrating those gifts with his own values and aspirations. Giving back became a way to show gratitude for those unearned advantages and make them meaningful.
The story about Jimmy Carter and Habitat for Humanity is such a powerful image of this kind of hands-on giving. Really striking.
That story really stands out, doesn't it? A journalist expected the former president and first lady to be symbolic figureheads, maybe pose for photos with a hammer. Instead, he was humbled to find them genuinely working as hard as anyone else on site, carrying materials, cutting siding in the heat. It was authentic, physical labor rooted in their core values, just doing the work.
So bringing it all together, values, navigating privilege, the importance of time, dealing with wishes and mistakes, defining our own success, and giving back the source ends with reflections on mistakes versus regrets. What's the difference there?
It makes a crucial distinction. Mistakes happen. They are generally discrete events that occur and are then, well, over. You learn, you move on. Regrets, on the other hand, linger, and they tend to cluster around moments where we failed to commit.
Commitment. That seems to be the antidote then, the key.
It's presented as fuel, as medicine, the answer to regret, apathy, lack of self-belief. Commitment is what moves the world, really. It's what builds confidence and helps you tap into deeper resources you didn't even know you had.
The final message is a powerful call to action, isn't it? Almost a challenge.
It is. Your life is yours to create. The source urges gratitude for that opportunity and a call to seize it with passion and boldness. Whatever path you decide is right for you, commit to it with all your strength.
And start now.
And echoing a thought, often attributed to Goethe, the moment you truly commit, providence moves with you, and all sorts of things you couldn't imagine begin to happen to help you. So the call is clear. Begin it now. What are you waiting for?
It's a powerful reminder that while we don't get to choose where we start in life, we absolutely get to choose the kind of people we become through our choices and, importantly, our commitments.
Exactly. And maybe here's something to mull over as you think about all this. In a world where, let's face it, increasing material wealth and those external markers of success aren't guaranteed for everyone anymore, doesn't it make even more profound sense to focus on cultivating that inner wealth? The wealth measured in personal fulfillment, earned self-respect, and maybe most importantly, peace of mind.